Oh man, I have so much fun on this show. This is the most fun I have all week is sitting here on Monday night talking poker with my poker pals. This is the Rec Poker Podcast, folks. Thanks for tuning in for another week. This is the forums edition of the show. We're going to be talking strategy. So I got to start by thanking our sponsors, the wonderful folks at the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Without their support, we wouldn't even be here right now. So thanks to everyone there for the great job they do. I also have to thank our premium members because most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, but that we really depend on the support of our premium members. That $15 a month doesn't sound like a lot to you. And let me tell you, it's a bargain compared to some of the other poker sites out there available, but it makes a huge difference to us. And even if you never come to the website, even if you never watch a video, even if you never join the book study or the study groups or the strategy discussions or the social events, if you enjoy the podcast and you like all the free stuff we put out on YouTube and all our live events and that kind of stuff, consider becoming a premium member and just dropping that $15 a month in to help us out. It sure does help us out a lot, and we really do appreciate the support from all our premium members. In case you don't know, my name's Jim Reed. I've got the best job in the world, like I said. I'm Bluffsterini in the home game and at Rec Poker Jim on Twitter. And if you want to find out about me or the rest of the Wrecking Crew, the magic makers around here, just go to rec.poker/crew, or you can listen up right now because you're going to meet a few of them right here on the air.
I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5v5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the PokerStars home game.
I'm Rob Washam. You can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere.
I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me at Taylor_Moss on Twitter, and Gopher Boy TJM in the home game.
And I mentioned our premium members. One of the perks of being a premium member is every week you get to come join the panel here on the podcast for the forums edition. If there's something that's interesting to you, a hand, a theory, a strategy, a spot, a forum post, feel free. We love it when premium members come to join us here on the show. Tonight, we're joined by Eric Anderson, longtime member and prolific forum poster himself. He's also very active in our Discord channel. Eric, why don't you share where Rec Poker Nation can find you if they want to find out a little more about Eric Anderson?
Hi. Well, the easiest way to find me is on Anderson85 at rec.poker. And I do encourage all the members to join these things. It really helps to try to put your thoughts into words. And it's good to, I'm surprised more people don't come join this.
I'm a little surprised too. Thanks, Eric, because I find you said it, man. It's one thing to watch videos. It's one thing to sort of listen to the podcast, all that passive learning. It's better than nothing. But, if Joe Koulis was here, he'd give you a scientific explanation for why this is the case. But your brain, it works harder. It works more actively when you have to kind of put these things into your own words, when you have to use a different part of your brain for it. So my apologies to Joe Koulis.
I think Joe Koulis might put a disclaimer on whatever was just described in that last few sentences too.
But it does help. It helps to put things in your own words, to critically analyze things, to be challenged, to actually have your assumptions challenged by other people. That's a key part of learning. And if you just kind of listen along and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, you're not really getting the most out of the material. So thank you, Eric, for coming on the show. And if you're listening along and you think this sounds like a fun time, please do come and join us. It's every other Monday night. We record these things right after the chats edition of the podcast, and all our premium members are welcome to join. Another one of the perks of our premium membership is that you get to participate in the theme of the month. Every month we have a different theme, and those are brought to you by Chris Jones. Chris runs most of the training material that we put out here. And he's been doing it for a while. He's got it down into a groove. We've been working through the streets this year. We're currently wrapping up the turn street decisions. We're turning over to the river, and we're going to be talking about various exploits and deviations from GTO. But don't take my word for it. Chris, why don't you explain kind of what you've been working on lately and what you decided to bring to the table tonight?
Yeah, so for May, we've been really talking about these sort of bread and butter spots where somebody opens and a blind defends. So it's a heads up spot, single raised pot, and sort of how we approach kind of the decisions as we go along in the streets. For the hand that we're going to talk about tonight, we're actually going to flip positions a little, but I think there's still some really relevant conversations to be had about river decisions in this hand. It's that exact kind of spot. We've got an early position opener in this spot and a blind who defends, and we go to flop, we get to a river, and we've got a decision before us. And that's kind of what we've been doing for several months here at Rec Poker. We've kind of been building on it. I'm excited to wrap that up. And as you mentioned, in June, we're going to be talking about reads and exploits, which is also really interesting with this spot that we're going to talk about, because we're going to look at something, and spoiler alert, there's going to be some factors in here that are going to sort of like maybe weigh our decisions, and how much should they weigh our decisions. And that's something I'm going to be really curious to hear from this group as we talk about it. So, but with all that said, let's set the stage, unless it looked like you had something to say, Jim.
No, I was just going to say
Okay.
that's a great point, because I feel like we study all this, we learn all this stuff, and then we get to the table when it comes to apply it. I think we all feel like we're pulled in all these different directions. Like, oh, I'm supposed to be worrying about this. I'm supposed to be factoring this in. How do we weigh these different factors?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the hardest things about poker, to be honest with you, is kind of like
for sure.
knowing what to prioritize. And I see we're just being joined by Kim Pet Vet Kilroy, longstanding member of the Wrecking Crew as well. Kim, why don't you just pop in and tell folks where they can find you if they want to find out more about what you're getting up to.
Sure. I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm Pet Vet 33 on most platforms, Fergie 56 in the home game.
Thanks, Kim. All right, Chris, take us on. So
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about this spot before we get into any of the anything else that happens at the table. I'm just going to talk about it as a pure spot, and let's talk about let's get to the river and talk about what kind of decisions we'd make. And then I'm going to show a few seconds to the panel a clip of this. We're going to describe it, so if you're just listening, you get a kind of a picture of what we're seeing, and then we're going to talk about how that might change our decisions, if at all. Okay, so this is from the Inside the Mind of the Pros series, which I think is one of the it's my favorite series of kind of video content poker. I think it's a fantastic series. You can go back and watch many years of this. They come to the WSOP, they go to some other great series as well. This particular one is following a French pro named Francois Perrault. Maybe the Canadians will help me out. Pirrault. Is that Perrault?
Oh, Perrault. Yeah, Perrault.
Perrault?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Perrault.
Okay.
Yep.
So, following Francois, we are in a 5K WSOP event here. There are 131 left, and there are 114 get paid. So we're getting down to it. And our hero, Francois, is sitting in the small blind, and has a very healthy stack, has 75 big blinds in their stack. The opponent, who we're going to be our villain in this hand, I guess we'll call them, has 31 big blinds. There are some shorter stacks at the table, but nobody's really getting down, and we've got a room full of people, so we're not quite sure where we're at. We're not quite at the bubble here. But so anyway, they open off of a 31 big blind stack, and it folds to us in the small blind, and we have king of spades, queen of spades, and we elect to flat. Fairly uncontroversial. We could 3-bet, we could try to bully our way through this, especially in this high leverage kind of spot. But I think this is a very typical hand, especially in the small blind, that we sometimes might flat with. And so that our hero elects to do so. And the flop comes 10 of clubs, 6 of spades, 3 of diamonds. So we've got 1 spade, fairly kind of irrelevant, not a flop that's going to hit a lot of any of our ranges, all that much. The under the gun player bets small, bets a 2 big blind after we check, and we call. And then on the turn, and he describes calling this because we've got the backdoor spades, we've got 2 overs, it's a very small bet. We can bully our way through this at this point because we have a lot of leverage in this spot. But we don't really need to think about that much because the turn is the king of diamonds. So again, we had a 10 of clubs, 6 of spades, 3 of diamonds board. Turn is the king of diamonds. We check and our opponent checks. So now we've reached a river. We've got this kind of marvelous looking hand, we think. And there's about 82K in the pot at this point, which is about 10, 11 big blinds. And we're sitting very healthy, and our opponent still has a decent chunk behind. And the river is the 10 of diamonds. So a final board of 10 of clubs, 6 of spades, 3 of diamonds, king of diamonds, 10 of diamonds. So there's a flush draw that has now gotten through. The 10 has paired. We're still sitting there with a very good king in our hand. This is where I want to kind of open it up before we look at what actually happened. What are your thoughts on if you might have played some of these streets differently, but let's just say we get to this spot, which I think is I think it's very reasonable to get to this spot this way. What are your thoughts now on this river here?
So we check the flop out of position, and our opponent fires on 10-6-3. So they're doing that at a pretty high frequency, I think, with a large portion of their range. And that includes some 10s, like they're definitely doing it with their 10s, but they're also doing it with a bunch of air, or just a bunch of other hands. We're clearly calling there. That's uncontroversial. You even got the backdoor straight and stuff, like you say. When the king of diamonds comes and we check, it does make sense for them to check back some of those hands that are now losing to a pair of kings, because we have some kings in our range there. So it's the 10. It's not necessarily. I don't eliminate the possibility of them having a 10 in their hand just because they check back the turn when the king comes. But until we make an action, they've still only made one aggressive action post flop, which is c-betting to a small size on a flop that they should c-bet a lot. So I don't think they can have, a set. I don't think they can have. Well, yeah, I don't know. I think they can still have a lot of value hands, but I don't think they have necessarily like a set that they would have continued with. So is the question whether we're going to lead out here or check? Those seem, obviously at this point, those are the only 2 options.
Yeah, those are probably our 2 options here, other than to get up and leave, I guess.
This game's hard. Yeah, I think there's a good chance that we're ahead here. If they're not holding a 10, then wouldn't they also bet a king on the turn if they had a king? I think they would. So unless they are holding a 10, I think we're ahead. So I'm going to be thinking about what's the best way to capture value here. Is it by leading and trying to get called by, a pretty thin range of hands from our opponent? Like, what are they going to call with 2 10s and a king on the board? Like, pocket jacks isn't in a very comfortable position at that point either. Or just check calling. The more I think about it, the more I kind of feel like check calling is the way that I would play it in flow.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think it's tough because we're out of position, and like if you ever are trying to like figure out like how valuable is it being in position versus out of position, I think this is like the classic example. It's like, hey, you've got top pair on what should be a relatively safe board, but then you think and like play through things in your head like Jim was, and it's like, okay, well, if I bet, they're gonna fold all their worst hands. If I check, they might check behind, and I might not get any value. Like, how am I going to go about getting value with a king here? And I think it's pretty tough. And the, I guess, downside for checking here is they're less incentivized to bluff because we are getting close to the money. Like, preserving chip stacks are like good. If they've got pocket 8s, like they're very happy just like checking this. down as it goes through. So I still think the check call is like the best option because like you want to allow them to bluff into you here, even though there's probably a low probability that they're going to bluff. But I still think like you take that opportunity versus if you bet, you're just going to let them play really well against your exact hand.
What position were they in again? I
It's-
know small blind, but the other, the
he's
razor?
under the gun 1, or I forget what we're actually supposed. Whatever the air. He's second to act at the
He-
table.
EP.
In a 8-handed or 9-handed, yeah,
This is a 8 max, so it's 8-handed.
all right. Thanks.
So low jack
Well, not quite.
under the gun 7.
Yeah.
And if folks are Eric Jin has recently published a blog post at the Rec Poker blog, actually going over his because this happens all the time. This terminology about placement and position is so stupid. There's all this ambiguity about what position you're in. So folks, head on over to the rec.poker/blog and check out Eric's article there.
You did a
he
great
really nails a lot
job,
of this down.
and I can't remember it. So I've got
I'm gonna pull it up here on the side while we talk about this.
If we're 8 max, the first position is EP, then it's low jack, hijack, cutoff, button, small blind, big blind. Right, Eric?
Well, low jack is 6-handed, so
Yeah.
it'd be under
So-
gun 7 if we're second to act. Yep.
it's whatever's before the low jack. That's
But-
what we're talking about here.
I think
Anyway.
the question to ask here is what is he going to bluff? I mean, if he's got an ace, is he going to bluff? Does he have a busted straight? He's still got good showdown value. I don't know if he's going to bluff anything here, especially with ICM.
I mean, maybe he's gonna bluff his really good. Like if he has the ace of diamonds, that seems like a
Mhm.
really good bluff. So like ace queen with the ace of diamonds, that seems like a pretty good bluff candidate. We don't know if this player is the type to do that, but that's something that we're maybe trying to capture. Are they going to bet their weaker kings, or are they going to call their weaker kings? That's going to be player dependent, I think. Well,
I'm
go ahead.
kind of struck. I'm kind of struck by the flop itself, the texture. If you recall, we talked about c betting, and this looks like a texture where we should be over betting the flop, right? Our c bet should be, I mean, optimally, the
Yeah.
solver would say that we
Big.
should be betting this more. Now he bet what, quarter pot?
Yeah, he bet really small.
So he bet very, very small. So is this a recreational player? Is he a professional player? Where is this really tiny bet coming from?
Mhm.
ICM is going to bring that bet size down. Like
That's true.
ICM is going to squish all that. Like if you talk about other situations where it's like normal situation should be an overbet, ICM is going to squeeze it down. Probably not to a quarter
I
or
was
third
gonna-
pot bet, but like, maybe overbet goes to 2/3 and, the
Right.
larger sizings go to half. And then even like your like really small sizings probably go to like a single big blind in these
Right.
types of situations.
So he bet really small in comparison to what the flop texture says a solver would tell you to do based on that flop texture.
Mhm.
So, my guess is that he is just c betting this flop because it doesn't look like it hits anybody. Another thing we need to keep aware of is the fact that we call from the small blind and not the big blind.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
means our range is going to be much smaller than we would if we had called from the big blind.
Mhm.
So it's probably less likely that he's worried about the flop hitting us as much as he would be if we were in the big blind.
Mhm.
So he could bet a little smaller, try to get a little value out of just whatever. And so that now we get to the turn and we get the king. And I say that we should check this, like you guys talked about, and let him bet into us. And it's definitely a call.
Yeah.
check call at this point.
So I think what I'm hearing fairly strong consensus is that we should check with the intention of check calling. And so Kim, no.
We're talking about the river right now?
Yeah, on the river. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we bet small, like a third
Bet small.
pot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. With the intention of getting called by pocket nines and
Yep.
pocket eights.
Yep.
And especially
Okay.
those that, have a diamond.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
I'm in
Okay.
the donk camp too, because I just don't think he's gonna bluff.
Yep. Well, let me just tell you what happens, and then I think either we're leading here or we're check calling. Any other thoughts about what we might do?
I started to get really worried about check calling here, honestly. The more that I like thought through this and like the board run out that it is, like the diamonds are scary. What does
I
our
think he
opponent
bets again
check
and he
with
has
us on the
diamonds.
turn? You
Why
think he
wouldn't
bets
he bet
turn?
again?
On the turn,
Sorry.
you mean?
Yeah.
Because of ICM, like it's not really worth bloating the pot in these ICM situations. Like normal other spots, I'm totally with you. I just think I have concerns that ICM would dictate a lot more passive actions on the turn here, especially with like strong draws.
So let me ask you this: would anybody check fold this?
I was honestly like starting to like hesitate towards it, especially if they use a bigger sizing. Like a smaller one, I don't know. We don't think they're bluffing. Like we keep using that like phrase, like we don't think they're bluffing. We don't think they're bluffing. Well, if they bet river, like they're not bluffing. Like they've got strong hands. Maybe they've got ace 10. Maybe they've got the diamond draw that came in. Like I'm second guessing myself a lot here.
This is why I say lead, like we lead this
Yeah.
river. For
I'm
a
kind
small
of
bet.
flipping now.
And
like
if we can always fold if we got raised.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's part of it. Like if we lead, it's a lead, it's a bet fold, right? There's
Mhm.
we're not
Yeah, for
calling
sure.
any raises if we
Yeah.
do.
100%. Yeah.
It's hard to put him on a weaker king because I feel like that king would probably bet the turn when the flush draw comes. And yeah, I get it. I think that does make a lot of sense too. I would check
Yeah,
call
diamonds.
smaller sizing, check fold to larger sizing. That makes sense to me as well. What were we saying, Rob?
If he had diamonds, would he bet the turn? If he had the diamond
Sometimes.
flush draw?
Sometimes, for sure.
I know Taylor's saying because of ICM, he might just try to realize his equity, but that's depending
I'd
on if
say
a
he-
diamond comes.
Yeah, I'd say he'd have to have exactly the ace 10 of diamonds to do that.
Yeah.
Where he's already hit the 10, bet it. Now a king comes, but his equity's kind of better, but now why get blown off if he gets raised, if he bets and gets raised, right?
Well,
Right.
and he can't have it. Well, no,
He can't have the
he can't have
10.
ace 10 because the
Because
10 of diamonds
Ace
is the
of 10
river
of diamonds.
Right, I was talking about on the turn.
on the turn. Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
but yeah, you're right.
Well,
Ten of
let me tell you
diamonds.
what actually happens, and then we're gonna talk about this a little bit more. So, our hero checks, the villain bets about 3/4 pot, and our hero folds. And he talks a lot about what we've talked about here, knowing that in theory land this is like a pure call. Like you're getting blown off the doors if you're folding this too often. But there's one particular spot of this hand that I want to talk about. This is the part where I want to show you this. Unless we want to talk about the decision before we jump into that, because I want to talk about one thing that he notices that helps him make this decision.
So I'll just remind our listeners, we do put these episodes out on YouTube, and Chris is going to kind of share a short clip here. We'll describe it for our audio listeners, but do come check out the YouTube channel, and you'll benefit out of seeing the visual element of this as well. I will say it does feel like there's nothing about this action that makes me think, oh yeah, he definitely doesn't have a 10. This is very consistent with a 10. And if he doesn't have a 10, we're likely ahead, but there's still all sorts of ways we can do it.
All right. So, and I'm not sharing the sound. So we're just gonna kind of watch this. But I want you to look at the way. So this is villain. Villain's on our screen right now. We're looking at our villain, and we're gonna watch the way that villain handles their chips, and talk about this a little bit. And I'm not going to play the whole clip because we got a time crunch. But here, so basically, here, let's just watch how villain handles their chips. This is on the river. We've checked to them, and the decision is on our villain here.
So this is the under the gun player that we're looking at here.
Yeah, we're looking at the under the gun player. Here's a very close up. We're looking at their chips. They put about 20,000 on the table. Now they put 40,000. Looks like they're going to put 40,000 in the middle. Then they put another 10 on there, another 10, and then they put it out in the middle. So basically, the way that I would describe this, and somebody else can help describe it as well, is they cut out a little bit, and then they just keep adding a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. It's like they're sort of like doing some sort of like calculation in their head. I'd be curious what anyone. I won't spoil what the pro talks about this, but is this something that you ever look for? And is it something that is there any way that people sort of construct their bets? Is this something that you're kind of looking for, and what does it tell you?
Yeah, man, what was it? 2 years ago, I made the final table for the Learn Pro Poker WSOP staking, and I grabbed a lot of people here and had me review hands and do as much as we could versus my opponents. And I caught some similar things, although online versus line, but I caught similar tells for my opponents where they would go like half pot and like click up like 1 or 2 extra half big blinds on there. And like that person that I found that read for, like that was always value when they would click up a few more extra half big blinds or, you know, a full big blind. And then every time they went half pot, it was very conducive of a bluff, where they would just click the half pot and make that bet size. And to me, this kind of feels similar, where it's like that opponent that I had that read on was like, okay, you know, I've got this hand. Let's go up a little bit more. And it feels like that's what this opponent is doing, counting out chips, adding a little bit more, going a little like, how much do I think I could get from a king here? Okay, you know, I'd go here. Well, you know, king, yeah, you know, maybe an extra 10, 20,000 on top of here, and then making their bet. It's very interesting. I've never like broken it down in live play, but like that was the first thing that came to my mind. It was like, okay, just keep adding an extra big blind on top there.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a string bet where you put some chips out there and you look to see how they react, and then you add some more.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Was he watching Francois's reaction to the chip stack as he kept adding to it, or was he? Because you couldn't really tell there if he was.
Yeah, you could only see his hands there, right?
Right.
Or what about, okay, I'm going to have to bet here. I want to win this pot. I'm going to bet this much. No, hang on. That's probably not enough. I'm going to add more. No, I really want him to fold. I'm going to have to bet this much.
This is the part. This is what I come to, because it's obviously he's decided he has to bet, or he's decided he's going to bet. He's decided he's going to bet. We don't know if it's for strength, for value, or as a bluff. And then I agree with Taylor. He's sort of keying in on, okay, if my opponent has a king, how much will they call, or how much do I need to put in for them to fold a king? This is the problem. This is why I have a problem with this as a tell, because all we know is that they're calibrating up their bet size, but we don't necessarily know that they're doing it for value as a bluff. There's an argument, I think, that says if it was a bluff, they would maybe just like start with a bigger size. You know what I mean? Because they don't want to give the impression, but I just, it seems like such a hard thing to really weigh in the decision making process, because a lot of the other elements of the hand are saying this is a pretty standard call.
I mean, and you can go watch the episode and see for yourself and hear the Francois's analysis of this. But it ultimately, he's kind of in the same camp as us. He's feeling like, where am I getting the value? Where are the bluffs coming from? There are a few out there. Is this player really making this move as we're kind of getting into this spot? This feels like a value heavy spot. And then he describes this action that the player takes as a very value heavy sort of action, that people who make bluffs usually have an idea in their mind. They don't want to draw attention to themselves, and they just sort of like put their bet out. Whereas the people who are like sort of taking this and putting a little pile on, and they're like trying to figure out, how much can I get paid? Because I've got something here. And so whether he's right, we never know. I mean, he folds and the player wins the pot. But I think it's a really interesting spot. And it's a really interesting way to think about some of our river decisions. And honestly, it's something I have never, ever, ever looked at. Like, how I've looked at people who look nervous or how they handle their chips, but like how they construct their bet in that physical way is something that I've never paid any attention to. It's interesting. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, see, he should have led the river.
Yeah.
But then when the guy makes the bet, he has to sit back for 2 minutes and watch the breathing.
You love that. You love that Ryan LaPlante trick. That is a good one. And I guess but that doesn't solve the problem for me, because then a player who's going to bluff the river when checked to is also going to, at some frequency, bluff raise a blocker bet on the river too, right? Like, do we gain enough certainty that we're behind if we blocker bet and they raise? I don't know. I just feel like at this level, it's a 5K entry. Sorry?
Still watch for 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's a good point. That's a good point. And I mean, you could do this too, right? You could when you check and they bet, you could watch for 2 minutes and see if that pulse goes down. But I this is a problem I have with live poker, because I play a lot more online than I do live, and I never know, just because they're calibrating something, that doesn't necessarily tell me that they're calibrating for value or for a bluff. So I feel like this puts me in jail all the time.
And this is where the exhausting part of poker comes in, because if you pay attention to showdowns and everybody else playing, you might catch that in another hand and have it in your pocket. But it's so hard to do that, especially for days on end.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's a cool spot though, Chris. I like that. It just goes to show, I mean, I guess we don't know if it was or wasn't, but it goes to show that there's value to be had in like Eric is saying, in that careful observation of even the most minute elements of play.
And I think it also goes, I mean, part of this, why I wanted to bring this is like, it's a big river decision. It's a big kind of spot, but it's also one of these where like, we know our theory and then we're going to sort of adjust, right? We're going to make some adjustments and say, okay, this is whether we would lead or check call. You know, I think either one of those is probably probably a solver does a mix of those things. I haven't actually looked it up, but probably there's a mix there in some way, shape, or form. And I think probably either one is fine and correct. But I think a check fold is arguably pretty wrong here in theory land.
Yeah, feels like it.
But
in a vacuum.
But I think in this situation, based on the reads and sort of the situation that we're in, close to ICM, how many bluffs is this player really going to have in reality? And noticing the way that they handle their chips, I think it becomes a very interesting decision and a pretty, probably exploitive fold.
Yep, it's a tricky one. I did pull up Eric Jin's blog post here. So folks, if you go to rec.poker/announcements/blog, because that's just such a super handy URL to remember, you will find one of the articles recently published by Eric Jin. And on a 9-handed table, Eric's theory is that stop counting back from the blinds, start counting forward from the button, and just you won't have to worry about this anymore. So for Eric, the 9-handed table positions are button, cutoff, hijack, low jack, MP, EP, under the gun, big blind, and small blind. And I do like it's just very clear. There's no under the gun +1, under the gun +2. You just start at the button and you work your way back. Button, cutoff, hijack, low jack, MP, EP, under the gun. And that does work well. And a little Easter egg, if you're an Eric Jin fan, Binkley in the Rec Binkley on Twitter and Com Binkley in the home game. If you're sitting 10-handed, the real under the gun seat he calls the hostage, which I really like. So go check that out if you like. And he's got a diagram up there, and he's also got a 6 max variation that just makes it just very obvious for how to adjust from current terminology. So good work to Eric Jin for that. And I hope that we're able to adapt this in the poker world, because we need this. As you can see, there's all this ambiguity about table positions. So hopefully we can clear some of that up.
So in this hand, the guy was actually EP then.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Because Francois was the small blind and he's 2 to his left. So he had to be the EP. There is no under the gun in an 8 max table.
There you go. That's it. All right. Chris, any final thoughts before we roll on out of here? All right. Well, then this is another great example of just the tip of the iceberg. Some of the learning material that's available here at rec.poker. Come try out our premium membership and head on over to rec.poker/crew if you want to see more of these smiling faces and learn more about the magic makers here behind the scenes. So I got to thank again Eric Anderson, Rob Washam, Kim Kilroy, Taylor Moss, Chris Jones, and of course the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and you, the listeners. We couldn't do it without you, and we wouldn't even think about it. So thank you again. See you all next week.